can I do to push away these consequences before they arrive? What can I do to divert the punishment of Allah Almighty before it visits me, and before I then start running around looking for relief, looking for cure, looking for forgiveness? Here we move on to the words of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi, who mentions 10 different ways in which we can do so in his Majmu' al-Fatawa. And he says, إِنَّ الْمُؤْمِنَ وَالْمُؤْمِنُ إِذَا وَقَعَ فِي سَيِّئَةٍ فَإِنَّ عُقُوبَتَهَا تَنْدَفِعُ عَنْهُ بِعَشَرَةِ أَسْبَابٍ. He says, when a believer falls into a sin, then he can push away the consequence of that sin and its punishment before it arrives via 10 different ways. The first, and try to memorize these, dear brothers and sisters, and application is our goal. Try to memorize these. The first, he says, أن يتوب فيتوب الله عليه فإن التائب من الذنب كمن لا ذنب له. He says the first way to push away the consequence of the sin is when such a person engages in tawbah, repentance, and thus Allah forgives him from that sin, because a person who repents is like a person who has no sins. The second way, he says, أو يستغفر فيغفر الله له, or he may ask Allah to forgive him, to engage in istighfar, and thus Allah pardons him. The third way, he says, أو يعمل حسنات تمحوها فإن الحسنات يذهبن السيئات. The third way, he says, a person may put forward good deeds which erase that sin, because good deeds by their nature, he says, they wipe away sins. The fourth way, he says, أو يدعو إخوانه أو يدعو له إخوانه المؤمنون ويستغفرون له حيا وميتا. The fourth way is when his brothers from the believers make dua to Allah Almighty for him, asking Allah to pardon his sins. That is the fourth way. As for the fifth way, he says, أو يهدون له من ثواب أعمالهم ما ينفعه الله به. Or he says, when some of the believers decide to gift him with the good deeds of some of their actions of worship, that may also benefit him as well, Ibn Taymiyyah says. What about the sixth way of pushing away the punishment before it arrives? The sixth way, he says, أو يشفع نبيه محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم فيه. Or when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam intercedes for this person on the day of judgment, and thus his sins are forgiven. What about the seventh way? He says, أو يبتليه بمصائب في الدنيا ما يكفر به عنه. Or Allah Almighty may trial him with difficulties in the life of this world, causing more sins to be forgiven. What about the eighth way? He says, أو يبتليه في البرزخ بالصعقة فيكفر به عنه. Or Allah may trial him in the grave via its difficulties, and thus Allah forgives more of his sins. What about the ninth? He says, أو يبتليه في عرصات القيامة من أهوالها ما يكفر به عنه. Or Allah may trial him in terms of the horrors of the day of judgment, and therefore more of his sins are forgiven. What about the 10th? Ibn Taymiyyah says, أو يرحمه أرحم الراحمين. Or Allah, the most merciful, may show mercy toward him. Let us rewind and ponder over these words, because these 10 avenues are going to form the crux of our khutbah for today.